Welcome to the Outside Music Podcast, where today's episode promises an engaging conversation with Dr. Chido Onumah. Celebrated for his groundbreaking contributions in journalism, media literacy, authorship, and activism, Dr. Onumah stands as a pivotal figure in shaping media and information literacy across the African continent. As the visionary coordinator of the African Center for Media and Information Literacy, his work has illuminated paths for journalists in West Africa and beyond, championing the depths and accuracy reporting on underreported issues. Dr. Onumah's rich educational background with degrees from University of Calabar, Western University Canada, and a PhD from the University Automata Barcelona underpins a career filled with notable achievements and accolades. From his pivotal role at the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission, EFCC in Nigeria, to his influential writings, including the seminal We Are All Biafrans, Dr. Onumah's voice has been instrumental in driving conversations on democracy, governance, and societal change. Tune in as we explore the depths of Dr. Onumah's experience and the breadth of his impact on media literacy, democracy, and the quest for justice. Welcome to the Inside Music Podcast. But welcome to the show, Dr. Onumah.
Thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
All right. So let me get to so the first question we have for you is you're a highly respected regarded leader in the area of media practice, social responsibility, and public accountability in Nigeria. Could you describe how you developed an interest in that field?
Oh, I
In
think
these areas.
yes. Well, it's natural. I mean, I have always been interested for reasons I probably can't say now in the history and politics of Nigeria. I grew up in Lagos, primary, secondary schools, and I was an active participant in the politics of the Second Republic in Nigeria, even as a young man. So I had a mentor who was a principal of a secondary school, Pa Jai Simi of blessed memory now, who used to, take me through the he was very active in the NCNC, the Zikis movement, and he put at my disposal books about pre-independence nationalist struggle. And then, of course, my dad, who was very active in the politics, not as a politician, but because he had a lot of friends who were part of the Unity Party of Nigeria in the Western region, which was a successor entity to the Action Group that was formed pre-independence. So as a preteen, actually 10, 11 years old, I used to take part in political rallies, activities of the Unity Party of Nigeria, which held sway during the Second Republic in much of what is today known as Southwest Nigeria, in Lagos particularly, when Alhaji Lateef Jakonde came to power in 1979. So pre-79, by 78, when I was a 12-year-old in 1978, when party politics resumed for the Second Republic, and I was stomping the ground, among those who would share flyers and go to political rallies and listen and take notes, actually write. So it's writing really has always been what has appealed to me. I used to be very good in the arts, what to say, drawing. I've always wanted something that would depict that inner conviction or desire to change society. So I found my dad wanted me to be a lawyer. I tried that, it didn't work out, but I assumed that if I had become a lawyer, I would eventually end up, writing. That's my passion. So, and which ultimately, by the time I got to the University of Calabar, I was very active on campus, both as a student union activist, but also a member of the campus journalism initiative. So almost in my first year, really, perhaps I still carry that record as the first year one student who would act as an editor in chief of a campus press. So, and Calabar was very active in, even though we didn't have media or journalism program, those in English and related subjects, theater arts, and it was the same tradition. So you have the likes of Ruben Abati, who passed through there, and a number of others who have become really well-known journalists and so on. But there was also the beehive of literary activity. Shoyinka used to come around almost every year during there was some Africa or West Africa literary festival. All the big names in the literary world would come to Calabar when so we had a vice chancellor, deputy vice chancellor rather, Professor Enes Emeyon, who was also a professor of literature. He provided the platform for that. So Calabar was really, but also political. We had the likes of Edwin Madunagu, had who was sacked. He and his spouse were sacked from the university during the Ali Mongo crisis. Calabar produced the first NANS president in 1980 post the Ali Mongo crisis. So Calabar I don't know if he still is, was a beehive of student activities, both media, politics, and all that. And it was one of the places to be in the mid 80s. And even though I was in the philosophy program, I was very active in student politics, campus media, and so on. It was only just natural that once I left school, and then there was the real serious competition among students who were part of the campus journalism initiative and who were already writing for the Guardian by the time we were in Calabar contributing stories. So it was only natural that once I left school, I would find myself doing media work. I guess that's how all of this came together.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I think I can relate in a much different way because I actually did spend time personally growing up in Calabar. My father uh, was the area controller in charge of Calabar, and then eventually zone, I think it was six then. He also grew up in Akwa Ibom, so he spoke African, he spoke Efik and he spoke Ibibio fluently. So obviously, I was in secondary school in the 90s and I'd spent time hanging out in Calabar. So I was very familiar with a level of, I'll call it activism. I was in secondary school anyway, but you could see there was a level of activism, very good and bad, within Calabar at that point in time. The bad would be the cultists, I guess. There's the good way. Other people are you referring to that there were all these activities and other things that were happening in Calabar, literary festivals and those things. It's very interesting that you started off with philosophy as well, because I did have a minor in philosophy, but it would be it bleeds on to the next question that we have for you is that how would you describe your early and abiding influences within and outside Nigeria for the work you do? What would be those influences that you'd say have been your early and still continuous and abiding influences?
Well, I mean, as I said earlier, growing up, my interests, for whatever reason, maybe because I was also exposed to a lot of work in terms of politics, reading, meeting personalities, even as a young person, that interest was there from the beginning, and it took me. So growing up, working, going to school in Calabar, serving in Maiduguri, and returning to Lagos to get a job in different media houses, the News, the Guardian, Sentinel, because I met a lot of people. But to respond to your question directly, just so whether it's Achebe, reading Achebe, or getting involved in what he and the likes of Shoyinka and others were doing, but also following the trend in terms of politics, military intervention, and so on. It's that desire has for me been the abiding push that has really, you know. So when I eventually left the country, I joined. So I left Nigeria first in 1996 in the during the Abacha crisis, after I was arrested over some story. Then I was at the news magazine. After my arrest, I decided it wasn't particularly safe for me to continue to stay. And then I moved to Ghana. I spent some years in Ghana meeting up with political exiles, Ghanaians who were also in Nigeria, some of them when they had problem in Nigeria, but a lot that had uh, participated in the different coups that took place in Ghana, who had gone on exile to London mostly and had uh, returned. I also met a number of, so it was at the height of the crisis in Liberia, the situation in Palestine, this situation in the Congo. In fact, it was just by luck that I didn't end up fighting in Congo, because I met, yes, I actually met with his late now Professor Wamba Diawamba. He was one of the key opposition figures in the crisis during the Mobutu era in Congo, and we had series of meeting in Accra. And it wasn't just the desire was to like go train and participate in the anti-Mobutu struggle, and we were having that kind of discussion. We were having discussion with the folks in Liberia how to intervene. I saw myself as some kind of Che Guevara reincarnate, wanting to solve the problems of the continent, not just Nigeria. So once I left the country in 96 and went to Ghana, I linked up with people you would, and Nkrumah internationally, so to say, people from different parts of the continent who had, of course, made Ghana home. And if you understand the role Ghana plays in the scheme of things in terms of Pan-Africanism, so then Ghana was the hub of many progressive elements who were trying to bring about change, or who were running away from repression and all of that. And of course, ultimately linking up with the likes of Dr. Kayode Shoyinka, Dr. Kayode Fayemi, sorry, the immediate past governor of Lagos State, and Dr. Tajuddin, our good friend who passed away many years ago, and some of the Shoyinka children, Maki and Ola, and so on, as part of the broader Nadeco anti-military rule struggle. So for me, the desire really has been how to bring about change. That interest, I've had to, get involved with a lot of initiative activities relating with different people from around the world. In each place I find myself, it's that has always been when I moved to Canada for grad school. Was also in the early years of the transition to civilian rule, and all of those who had struggled against military rule in Nigeria were coming together and building coalitions, the likes of Professor Bolaji Aluko and so on. So everywhere I found myself, really, the what has been paramount has been the desire to bring about change in our country. Bring, I believe that we say Nigeria is a country of great potentials. I don't think we've started to even scratch the surface of the potentials of the country. And you know, I just got off an interview with a Pan-African vision that is made in the US. And one of the things I was saying that even though I've lived around the world in schooled, worked in different places in Asia, Europe, North America, the Caribbean, and so on in almost 3 decades now. For me, there's nowhere like home. The abiding faith in Nigeria and its potentials and what it's able to do. But I also think that particularly intellectuals, academics, we haven't theorized Nigeria enough. I've lived and worked in the US. I come around generally and I see, and I also, as a researcher, I've studied American history, and you look at it may not be perfect. What you have today in the United States, for example, is a reflection of the imagination of what was and is possible. So whether you look at the likes of Thomas Paine, for example, or even the politicians, the Jeffersons and co, how they imagined, look at the theory, if you read materials around the role of of separation of power, or the way you talk about the principles of federalism, what kind of powers the federal government and the states and the judiciary, the legislature, and the vis-a-vis the different forms of the different arms of government and so on. We need to be able to put that properly in perspective and then begin to work towards achieving that. And we haven't done that enough. And I think that's what I have committed myself to doing in the longest term.
It's commendable. It's commendable. I mean, there's always that conversation about intellectuals and society, and it's very interesting that you go back to the era of Thomas Paine, Common Sense, which is one of the key catalysts to America's people in the colony, as they were called then, seeing a certain kind of resistance. Not even a break from England, actually, just a certain kind of resistance to what they felt was a million plate number in DC, representation without taxation. So it's very interesting that you feel, in this modern era, people feel like intellectuals are a lot more dishonest. Let's put it that way, for a number of reasons. And it's interesting. And you know, it bleeds into the next thing I'd like to ask you. It's in your as a student of the as a student as you participated in the media landscape and you've been a student within the media landscape, how would you express the role the media must play in strengthening democracy?
Well, the media has a fundamental role, particularly for us. So yesterday I was having a conversation with colleagues in the office. One of my colleagues who had worked at Tel many years ago, we were discussing the TB Joshua crisis, and some staff members were in support, others were opposed, and then we then zeroed in on the role of the media. So he said when he was a reporter at Tel magazine, Tel had done an insert because the argument was that, people are not focusing on the good things that the late pastor did. They're focusing on these other things. And my argument was that, look, you can focus on different things. If this man was engaged in some humanitarian acts, that's good. If he was engaged in criminal acts, that's bad. And the laws of the land would be that if you have reason to be charged or if you commit crime, you have to Nobody, the law doesn't say because you are a humanitarian or you are a so-called good person, if you commit crime, your crimes are forgiven. But going back to the question of the media, so he was saying that his management Tell they did a 5-page or so supplement on TB Joshua, and he was opposed to it, and he made his opposition known to the management that you can't do this because then, which of course was basically for pecuniary reasons. You collect money from this man, it's almost like you're giving him a platform, you're endorsing him. And we've seen media play that kind of role. One of my, or the major part of my work, my doctoral research was around the saving the media. The media is first and foremost business, so it has to survive. You know well the principles undergirding business, survival of business. So, in part of my recommendation, particularly for media in developing countries, like whether it's corporations who support the media or government who support the media, that independence is critical, both for the media itself, but also for society, for it to be able to do its watchdog role. So if the media, for any reason, has to depend on subvention from some interest group or from individuals, really, you ultimately, the decision of what appears in the paper and then what the citizens would consume would be the views of individuals, the views of interest groups, and so on. It's really unfortunate, and I don't know what happened. If you look at the development of media in Nigeria, even as a teenager, much of my pocket money used to go into buying the Guardian newspaper. When the Guardian started in April 1983, about the time I was writing my final exam in secondary school. And I think they started as a Sunday newspaper. By June or so, when I left secondary school, they had moved to a daily. So much of my pocket money went into buying newspaper and reading. And then, of course, the old man would buy newspapers, his own newspaper, the Tribune, and all that, and would read. I don't know how many of our young people today who would spend their money to buy newspaper. One, whether they can afford it. Two, of course, the interest. And then, of course, there is the shift in technology, which ensures that a lot of the materials in paper that you can read or buy, if you buy a newspaper, are available for free online. So people are doing a lot of reading on their Kindle, their cell phone, or computer. But it's even the interest. So I spent a lot of time in South Africa researching the media in South Africa when I was doing my PhD work. You would see newspaper daily, the Sunday Times in Joburg, different papers in the Pretoria, Johannesburg area. Papers would sell 250,000 copies a day on the weekend. On daily newspapers, I don't remember the names now. Papers would sell 100,000. They were specialized magazine on motoring, on farming, on fashion, and all those things, which used to be what was obtainable in Nigeria, you know, 30, 40 years ago. I remember even with the Daily Times group, they had the Daily Times, they had the Sunday Times, they had the Evening Times, they had a fortnightly newspaper, something that had to do with chronicling the history of Nigeria, whether post independence, the coup. A lot of what I learned about the country growing up in Lagos was actually from that Daily Times publication. You buy this paper, you spend time. All those things died a natural death. And I think a lot has to do with the way the economy moved, but also the political instability. It seems to me, looking back now, that the media is perhaps the first casualty in any crisis in this country, whether it's a crisis of confidence in terms of nationhood, whether it's the military intervention, whether it's political instability, poor leadership. The journalists and the media in general take the first hit. So what happens generally is that those in power, political interests, have hijacked the media, and they've not been able to manage it in such a way that would lead to its progress. Unlike a country where you go to South Africa, so media, it's real business. You go to Cape Town, for example, and see huge investment in the media. You come to Pretoria, the capital, or go to Johannesburg, the major city. You see edifices that are linked to media houses. Journalists are paid, uh, taken care of. I remember walking into a newsroom. It's so, and I don't want to mention names on your program before we get into trouble. But so I was interviewing the managing editor, and this is also to pay tribute to those journalists there, with all coming out of apartheid, and all the struggle they've had, to the resilience. So I was in this newsroom, and the managing editor was gracious. She had arranged interview with some important personalities in the media with me in South Africa with me, and he was saying, "Oh, do you know this person?" I said yes. He said, "Oh, she used to have office here, and then it closed down." And I said, "What happened?" He said, "Oh, he brought his Nigerian system here, set up room, we provided him space, and he wasn't paying salaries, he wasn't doing this, he was just, and then we we had to close, or the government really, so the government withered the beast stick, and then they had to leave. So that's the kind of thing. And it also goes to show, uh, to a great extent, the whole question of institution and institution building. So, if you have regulators or regulations in place, how effective are those regulators? How effective are the regulation? So, you work in the media. A lot of my colleagues and friends who are in the media here, 6 months, 8 months, 1 year, they've not been paid salary, they still go to work. A lot of us who go into journalism these days is just to use it as a stepping stone to something else. So it's a lot of challenge for the media. I think media ownership, we need to have the reinvention of the media space in terms of ownership, in terms of what it's supposed to do. So pre-independence, we had the West African Pilot, the Tribune, and different newspapers that were set up as the mouthpiece of the nationalist, anti-colonialist, and so on. Then post-independence, many of them tried to transform themselves. And then during the Second Republic, media really hasn't been stable for a number of reasons, and I mentioned some of these earlier. You find that a lot of business people, whether it was in the Second Republic, for example, where the likes of MKO, Abiola, and so on set up newspapers, which were essentially to propel their political campaign. Kola set up. Every politician wanted to have a newspaper because they felt or knew that it was the platform that could propel them to the kind of the political, where they want to be politically. even the military boys would, encourage or give money to people to set up newspapers for their own interest. So newspapers essentially, how media houses haven't started off as a business thing with an interest. Of course, that interest will be to provide information, genuine, authentic information to the people, but also a platform for conversation on some of the salient issues within the country. And when you have that, well, you check what in the United States, in different parts, newspapers have survived for decades, many years, and here, because the newspapers are also aligned to specific interests. Once those interests are no more, either in power or front and center of things happening in the country, the newspapers die. Yeah, I think what is happening to the media today is a sad reflection of our own attitude as a people, as a country, as a state, in terms of the value we place on the media. It's not one that is edifying. It's not one that can actually lead to the survival of information. And would I also say that perhaps part of the challenge is also the way the culture, a culture of openness, of freedom of expression, that people is still, our society is still a closed society, is still one steeped in the whole old values of authoritarianism and this deep divide between modernity and antiquity and so on. So that challenge has impacted the media in a way that is not it's not good at all.
Yeah, it's interesting. I just can't help laughing when you say the I worked in a building once. I always tell this story privately. I worked in a building once where there was this security guy down in the lobby of the building. He'd have to come in to get to. I think I was on the 29th floor. I started on the 8th. I ended up in 29th, I think. It was this Panamanian black man who was like one of these, you know, skin color is one of his identities. Let me just put it this way, right? Come down our just I saw him now, like, grandpa was early 20s in the middle of Manhattan, and he was always like beating on the drum beats of Africa and Nigeria and all these places. And he said something one day that made me, realize. He said, he talked about, essentially, let me just put it this way. He echoed what you echoed. The one set of people he's worked for in his life that didn't pay him on time. So I'll be black. So, like, very interesting when we were saying that, there's a Nigerian mentality, which is true. I think that's the hardest part, where generally um, salary is like somebody doing you a favor, right? And it affects institutions generally. It goes into the media. It's I don't know, the debate is very different in terms of what, if we get back to the media aspect, it's very different in terms of the conversations we have globally. The conversations here is more ideological. The media is more ideological. It's more of the conversation, the debate or the argument is more of an ideological thing. How itself does the media need to be? Um, how legacy institutions are also adapting to this thing, and a lot of them are taking more and more ideological positions. Where do they leave their ideological positions? Is it purely on the editorial pages, or does it permeate the entire publications? Some media outlets do a good job. There are a lot of new media outlets, and thankfully, we can create mediums like this when people can have this conversation. And that being said, what would you say two things. What would you say is the main pitfall to media practice in Nigeria? And how would you assess the public trust in the media currently in Nigeria?
I don't. The first question you're asking what the challenges are. I didn't get.
The main pitfalls of media practice in Nigeria currently.
Okay.
Well, how
Well,
would you say? Yeah.
yeah. There are a number of issues, challenges, opportunities, those that have been taken and those that are not have not been taken, those waiting to be taken. I think one of the biggest challenges in my view would be the proper education of those who end up. It's an all commerce thing, and I guess that's how it is in different parts of the world. So a lot of people, it's almost like in here, you find people who don't, maybe there is nothing else for them to do. So people join, and I think the same thing you find even with the police, like people, "Oh, let me just manage this kind of situation." So you don't find people who have the both the talent, the passion, the willingness, the desire to want to bring about change. So being in journalism, all the fairy tale stories, and you find a few journalists who live very well, not because of the work they do, but because of the opportunity they have. So you just have to have your what's it called, your ID card, and flash it that you are a media practitioner. Again, this colleague of mine, back to the TB Joshua conversation, he said somebody told him that, oh, he interviewed TB Joshua, and when he left, the man just gave him a bundle of cash, 3 million naira. I mean, that's so,
The famous brown envelope.
yeah. So you find that people tell stories about this, like they survive. A lot of people in the media survive from this kind of money they get in the course of their work. So it's really like free money. You just get tips, or you get compensated for doing a story. So it's something that will be of interest to a number of people. What then happens that a lot of people who come into media just come in because it's readily available. There's really nothing else, or the kind of work they want to do, they can find it, and then they end up in the media space. So for them, ethics, morality, all kinds of things really don't matter, just to take advantage of the. Then, of course, there is the question of funding, saving the media, the survival of the media itself. So people work in media houses, people set up media houses. They just the same kind of disinterest or lack of proper planning and organization. You set up media houses, you don't care whether people are paid salaries, no insurance scheme, health scheme, or anything in place. You just set up, call some journalists together, pay them some money, set up this, write what I want you to write. So that's another challenge. The way newspapers are set up, the way media organizations are set up. Then, of course, there are external factors like the pressure from government. So, Nigeria is a place where a minister or local government chairman or a politician can influence a ministry in terms of which newspapers they give adverts to, and so on, which newspapers they should withdraw adverts from. So the revenue challenge is key. So I've talked about the journalists themselves, how they come into the profession. I've talked about the infrastructure and institution, those who set up media houses, what their aims and objectives are. then you can talk about what kind of regulation, and I don't mean regulation in government deciding what and what people should hear or see or listen to, or regulation in terms of putting in place certain minimum standards that if you have to do this, you have to have this in place and so on, so that journalists are secure, their welfare, their safety, their health. The kind of a friend of mine is just attempting to start some foundation to attend to the health and psychological well-being of journalists. A lot of journalists do fantastic work here, and they go through a lot of trauma. Nobody cares. Nobody. People just want to hear, read stories, see the stories. But then, of course, we can also talk about the modernization of the media. I mean, as far back as almost 25, 30 years ago, the whole question of convergence of the media, whether ownership. And I remember as a young graduate student in Canada, that was the topic of my dissertation, ownership structure, how big businesses are buying up media, smaller media platforms, and then driving these media platforms out of business. But not just that, also limiting the kind of voices you can hear. Then convergence in the sense that you find radio, television, newspaper, and now new media houses coming together. And some of these things have been bought by film houses or DG companies and so on. So, well, this is a new challenge, but it's going to be with us for some time. There is a sense in which, as a people, as a country, we are not ready for that. I mean, Nigeria. And a lot of it has to do with the nature of the country itself, the poor economy, so many other factors, electricity, power, and we live in a dysfunctional society. And I'm really surprised most of the time why people want things to function in Nigeria. We produce 3,000 or 4,000 or 5,000 megawatts of electricity. I guess that's what like an airport in South Africa or New York or somewhere in Atlanta would use. That's what the whole country of 200 million people is. So you can then imagine trying to make sense out of all of this infrastructural decay, lack of efficient management of systems in terms of transportations. Many years ago, newspapers used to be moved by pickup buses, transmitting from here to Maiduguri or Calabar or Enugu and so on. With time, of course, the richer media platforms set up printing presses in those places, so it was easy to do simultaneous printing or not read the newspaper. The Lagos people will read today, read it in Maiduguri 2 or 3 days later. But the point I'm trying to make is just to tell you how important infrastructure is to the survival of a business or something like the media. It rests on effective management of infrastructure, technology, and everything. And the country is really lacking in all of this. So it's impacting the media. It's impacting the media in a way that is putting pressure on it as a business, putting pressure on it as a platform for the dissemination of information, putting pressure on it as a process of allowing ventilation of opinion in society, and therefore ultimately defining what people hear or see or listen to and how that shapes the development of the country itself.
Yeah. It's very interesting. I remember growing up, back something you were talking about before. I remember growing up, I used to That was the end of the Abacha era into the Abdulsalam era into Obasanjo's civilian administration. I used to read Tell, Temple, um, all those magazines that at one point in time nobody knew where they were publishing from. So there was a passion, a certain passion for somebody to do that. So for people in this era, that sounds very alienistic. Like, why would anybody even go to those lengths to do anything? We're just talking about. I was talking with some friends. Well, I was listening to their questions about the killings in the northern part of Nigeria that is not even covered by anybody, and it's more of independent solo people that just decide to give it coverage. Some people have, maybe someone like here we discuss about it, but some people have maybe larger, like in media influencer platforms, and they've one person has gone into that I know of just to shed light on what's happening there. That being said, the second thing I asked was, how would you assess the public trust in the media currently in Nigeria?
Well, all of this then boils down to the question of trust. So when people don't see the media playing the role it should play, or when it does play a role, it's shrouded in ethnic, political, regional, religious interests, it's difficult for people to have faith in the media. I think, particularly for this generation, and I'll go back again before responding properly to this question. When I talk about, I think people take lightly the whole question about whether it's the structure of the country, but also the direction it's going. Yeah. If I'm not mistaken, I think it's in this year's budget. There is about 5 billion for the building or maintenance or something of a library in the National Assembly. We don't
Yeah.
have we don't have a national we don't have a national library in Abuja. The National Library has been under construction for long as I can remember. The building is still there. It's about maybe 2 kilometers from where I'm speaking from here. There was an event sometime last year or so. The popular architect Nemo Basi, who is also an environmentalist, we were together at Yaradua Center, and we were at the top floor of the building, so we could see, have some nice aerial view of Abuja. And the library, the National Library, was one of the things jutting out in our view, and this architect just took one look at the building and said, Chido, this building is useless. They should just pull it down. Like, they should just pull it down and start something fresh. And say what I say, oh, this is like, you know, how many centuries the building, the concrete, the way it was constructed and everything. I say, for a modern library, in terms of connectivity, internet, um, Wi-Fi access and all of that, that this thing won't work. The only way to work is that you have to, rip holes in the walls or concrete, do some real wiring for and so on. But the point I'm trying to make is it's just about priorities. So we blame our young people for not reading enough, for not reading at all, when you don't create opportunities for them. Growing up, I mean, the library used to be like my second home. I would walk away during school. First, we had a library in school, so most times I would just go sit down on the floor in the library somewhere during break time or something if I'm not playing football, or during holidays or weekends. I'll go to the library, public libraries in Lagos. There are no public libraries. I attended a program at Harvard University, Harvard Law School, many years ago. I'd done a presentation on digital media for young people. And one of the materials I got out of that conference was this huge flyer. It could fall into about 8 places about libraries around the world. Then this must have been over a decade ago. Between I think Canada and the United States, Canada and China had the most, anywhere between 4,000, 5,000 public libraries across the country. You know. So in Canada, for example, even though it's a small country, almost anywhere a radius of 2-3 kilometers, there is a
Pretty
public
much.
yeah,
Yeah.
there is a public library where the kids can go read, borrow videos, watch, have access to public computers, laptop, iPads, and so on. When I opened that thing, Benin Republic had more public libraries than Nigeria. Benin Republic. So, so I brought it. I brought the paper back. It was interesting. I don't know how I lost that thing. It's something that you just can put up in your room or office. So I brought it back and I went to a media house in Nigeria. Met the publisher. When I was with the publisher, there were a few reporters. So I started a conversation. I said, "Oh, guys, like how many public libraries do we have in Abuja?" We started, "Oh, there used to be one in was closed down. And there used to be one in Gaki. We don't know if it's functional." These are, these are journalists. They don't even know where public libraries are. So what are we talking about in terms of research? And it's not like the newsrooms are equipped. They have their own mini library. So the public libraries ought to be the place for research, documents if you're writing, and so on. So I said, oh, then of course the so-called National, which is a rented space, 4 or 5 story building. I know I've visited that place several times. Each time I publish a book, I go there to take my ISBN number. We're doing some work, maybe magazine, journal, something, get ISSN number. It rains. I've been there and I saw books I gave because they will expect you to bring 3 or 5 copies of each book you publish. You deposit it there with them. And you go back and you see these books in halls because there is no space to keep the books. They are all lying on the floor in the hallway. Then it rains, and some of these books are drenched, soaked in water, and all of that. And if you're an author, a writer, you know what it means or what it takes to. So, when you have a country like this that does not prioritize, you know, things, so I back to the whole question of the library, and so I said, oh, and I now told them that I just came back from Harvard. I had this conversation and I brought this document to show that Benin Republic has more public libraries than Nigeria. And they said, oh, it can't be true. And then we started counting the public libraries. We couldn't even finish counting on one hand. Like, where are they? There are just no library. So what does the state prioritize? For those who want to learn, who want to research, what opportunities, are what opportunities are available to them? None, basically. Our priorities are so that what is of interest to the state and the caliber and people who run the state are people who are not interested in learning, who are not interested in scholarship, who are not interested in providing opportunity for the state, for the country to grow technologically, educationally, and so on. It doesn't matter to them. Their children are in schools outside the country. All they are interested in stealing enough money so that they can sustain that lifestyle of sending their children to some of the best to
Skills.
some of the best schools in the around the world. So that's where we find ourselves. We really can't make progress as far as I'm concerned, and you can add the media or any other aspects of national life in Nigeria unless we have some kind of national reset. For you go back to the whole question of newsprint. Why did the newspaper industry, one of the reasons for the collapse was the whole newsprint thing? That was the steel rolling mill, the Okuiboku Okuiboku factory, the Wokin paper mill. All these things were things put in place, and then with all the resources, natural resources, we had trees here that could produce newsprint. Suddenly, by the time newspapers, they were importing news print by 86 when the Naira was devalued up until Babangida came to power. In fact, before Babangida, or when he came to power, on August 27, 1985, the Naira had more value than the dollar. By the time he implemented his structural adjustment program a year later in 1986, and then by on and on from that 86, the Naira became 1 Naira to $1, and things started going down the slope, and newspapers had to pay heavily to import newsprint for their production. So they started cutting back on the number of prints every day, and gradually till we find ourselves today. I don't know how many cumulatively all the newspapers printed in this country. With a country of 200 million people, whether we print up to 50 or sell rather up to 50 or say 100,000. I doubt that. Of course, then there's a question of new media, digital media. A lot of the newspapers are also produced online or posted online. So people would rather, instead of spending 300 Naira to buy a newspaper, they would rather just they rather just read. So whatever it is that the media is facing today is just a reflection of how dysfunctional our society, our state uh, has become.
Yeah, yeah. We're approaching the hour mark, so it's really going to have to be. You'd let me know when you'd have to go. But that's how much more time you'd be willing to to give to the conversation. But the next question what we have, maybe we'll probably try and be winding a lot more. Is that, some critics will say that Nigerian media has deteriorated over the years to the point of reflecting ethnic and religious sentiments rather than any ethical considerations. Do you agree with that, with the view?
Yeah, I do, and it's not unusual, and it's not just in Nigeria. Most places, and including the United States, even when it appears to be ideological, there is the overarching interest of ownership structure. That is key in the development or in what you get in terms of media output. Who owns the media? What interests is it representing? So when you have a country that there is our country is one, what is it that we have in common as a people? The country is still bedeviled. All the fault lines, religious, ethnic, tribal, and you find it everywhere you go, in the military, in politics, in the church, in mosques. It's only normal that this will reflect in the media itself. So when you have a country that is united, so that the basic fault line will be that of light and darkness, progress or lack of it, then you can begin to talk about media that represents the interests of those who are progressive or the interests of those who are reactionary or conservative and so on. But we don't have that kind of country yet. It's inevitable that our media would be colored in that ethnic, religious, because ultimately at the end of the day, it's about interest that people have to survive. You have to push your ethnic interests, you have to push your tribal, your religious, your business interests, and so on for you to survive. And let's not kid ourselves. Let's not assume. The reality is that we live in a country that people carry with them these biases, and it's only natural that media it's going to. So even whether people who buy the newspaper, and let's just focus on newspaper, for example, or even listen to certain radio or watch television, they think, oh, because this thing is owned by this person from this ethnic group or religion, that's why they are carrying certain news, that's why they are protecting certain interests. And it's not unusual for that to happen. It works then if you have an educated society. Ours is still a society where the majority are not literate. So even if you watch television or listen to radio or read newspapers that show these ethnic or religious biases, you can't then sift through what you're reading and say, oh, okay. So you come to the US, most times I'm in Canada or I'm in the US proper. I listen to MSNBC, Fox, and different things. I know I'm listening to this. I know where these people are coming. It's just left for me then as somebody who has a level of awareness to accept what. But there are even people, so-called educated, who are in the US who are listening to Fox and they won't listen to CNN, or listen to CNN, they won't listen to Fox. Whatever they hear on Fox is the gospel truth. Whatever they hear on on CNN is the gospel truth. To also have that ability to critically analyze or evaluate information and then make informed judgment. So it's worse in a developing country like ours, where the literacy level is high, critical thinking is just not there, even within educated and urban people. And all of this goes back to this theory of my argument that our media is a reflection of our society. What you find, the media can be different from what the society itself is. It's a reflection of how we operate. It's almost like when we see a lot of people see police people, for example, and say, "Oh, the policemen are the most corrupt people in Nigeria." It's because they are the ones, like the first line of people you see and collect. The thing that the police people do, judges do it, magistrates, teachers, doctors. A few years ago, I was in Abuja and I'd gone to swim, and I had water in my ear. I've not, since I left the country almost 30 years ago, I've really not maintained a doctor here. So I don't think that probably was the first time I'll be going to a medical facility in Nigeria in almost 2 decades plus. And then I went there to get a card. They refused. The medical center in Galki, one of the poshest areas of Abuja, they ensured that I didn't have a card. Like there was no
Hmm.
record. of my coming to the hospital. So the guy said, "Oh, don't worry, I'll just send you upstairs." So they said, I said, "No, like I have a history or tradition of making sure like I go. I've lived in Canada for very many years, family doctor and all of that." So the guy said, "Oh, just go upstairs." So I went upstairs, and the discomfort was really much. So I needed to work. I tried all the things I had to do personally. The thing didn't work. So I went upstairs, and they kept me in this dingy room. And then somebody came and just took me inside the room, rusty scissors and hands and something. I said, "Oh, can I have a record of?" Say, "Oh, don't worry." And he just took something and put it in my ear, pumped some hot water or something, and the thing just came out. I was relieved, and he said your money was 3,000 naira. I paid him, and I said, "Okay, so can I get a car? Like, can I have a record of this in case?" He said that, but in Jesus' name, there will be no next time. I was beside myself. I said, "No, in case like I come back here, of course they wouldn't want me to have any record, because if I came back to that place and said, oh, I was here before, they won't, there'll be no record of it. God knows where the money. So that's how dysfunctional. And to think that, interestingly, I don't know now whether it was before this my encounter or after, I led a protest to that hospital because a friend of ours, this younger sister, died. I think she had what was it, this sickle cell thing, and they took her to that hospital. The way they treated her was just not right, and the lady passed. So we led people who protested there until we saw the management. But just that just gives you a sense of, how. So when people blame the media, you wonder why. Like, oh, did they want journalists to be super people, or even though we have a constitutional role, I don't think we have a constitutional role more than the judiciary, the legislature, or the executive, who are also who are in the constitution itself. This kind of Superman role that they expect journalists who work with some within some of the worst conditions any worker can imagine. See, yet if on Monday, for example, I went to the Transcorp Hilton Hotel on the invitation of the BBC to watch the premiere of the documentary on TB Joshua. And then as we were driving out of Transcorp, I saw this journalist. He had a huge camera bag in on one shoulder, another bag here. He was carrying a tripod on his hand, walking to the main road. This was almost around 10 p.m. So I would imagine that even if this journalist doesn't have a, a car of his own, that whatever news platform he works for would arrange, they should have a vehicle to convey. This is not something a journalist should be carrying on the streets. They would arrange for a vehicle, Uber or Bolt or something to convey. But I saw this guy walking from the main entrance, walking to the main road, obviously going to look for a vehicle, a taxi. I mean, somebody could attack him, they could steal those things and repel his life and all of that. So journalists really, it's a dangerous zone. You don't want to talk about those who report violence or the war, or covering all the ethnic killings and so on. And many of them, then of course you see all these dictators, governors, local government chairmen sprouting up in every nook and cranny of the country. Where you write something, the safety of journalists. You write something, and a local government a politician will slap you, abuse you. We saw what happened with Femi Fani Kayode not too long ago. because they give journalists money, very few people have respect for journalists. They not only slap you, they can order a governor will order the arrest of a journalist because they wrote a story or they didn't write the story the way they wanted them to write the story and so on. So journalists and journalism may well be an endangered profession in this country of ours, and I won't be surprised. As I said, for me, I whatever is the plight of journalists today, whatever is the nature of the media today, I think essentially it's a reflection of how dysfunctional our society itself is.
Yeah. I don't know how much more time you'd have, if you do have
Yeah,
more time.
we can do till the top of the hour. Well, this 10:24 here, maybe 10:30. I don't know how many more questions. Have we taken care of the base question? I mean,
Okay, okay,
I do this
sorry.
thing with Rudolph Okonkwo, 90 Minutes Africa. One of the challenges I have with Rudolph, like, let's stick to the time because people have a lot of things. So the shorter your podcast, it's easier for people to you know, relate with it. People may want to listen to you, but then when it goes on and they just have other things to do. So I don't know how whether we've taken care of a case question. If
Well,
we
yeah, well, I mean, yeah, there's still a few, but it all depends on how much time you have.
we can run through quickly and see what we can do.
Okay, yes. Let's just look for solutions and do something positive before we talk about for you to evaluate the current political climate and this thing. But what steps do you think could be taken to address problems and challenges plaguing in the media in Nigeria?
Well, that my response will be there has to be we have to be intentional in terms of preserving the media space. So government and I'm happy there are conversations. There are different organizations that I was part of this, if I'm not mistaken, either in October or November last year, part of a media platform where the conversation about how do we address some of these challenges. And I think the Guild of Editors as well and the NUJ working in partnership with different organizations are also beginning to look at this challenge and see how to deal with it. So whether it's welfare of journalists, maybe for example, and I just speak to this randomly. If you look at the welfare of journalists to say, for example, set up some fund that journalists can get money from when they are in danger, health, death, and so on. The money itself can come from governments, or government can put in place measures where corporations or institutions can get some of their profits will go into this fund and will be managed by a special group and so on. We can put in place measures also for the safety of journalists, ensure that when journalists are attacked, people get punished for it. I don't remember if anybody or the other individual or organizations have been held to account in terms of violence against journalists. I don't remember. So once you don't do that, it continues. People will continue to abuse journalists, violate the rights of journalists, but also expanding the frontiers, the conversation around freedom of expression, freedom of the press, the right for people to know, but also the right of journalists to report. Then, of course, saving the media itself would there has to be serious efforts on the part of the government, and that shouldn't lead to control. So creating, for want of a better word, the enabling environment for the media to function and thrive. So if there are things, we give businesses the concession, we give individuals concession, whether to import or produce certain things. We should be able to extend some of this to media organizations. So if you need to import materials, machines for a registered media organization, you need to bring in a printing press, you need to buy equipment, computers, cameras, and so on. That government can, really slash whatever is its duty and some other thing, bottlenecks. You don't have to. It's not about treating the media differently, just understanding the nature of the work that this industry does, and that it needs all the flexibility and it needs all the support to be able to do this work. Government has to be intentional in doing that. And of course, we can then bring in the journalists themselves or practitioners themselves trying to not necessarily regulate, but okay, give minimum, whether it's minimum education or even if you don't have the education, which is what happens with all profession. So if you want to write as a columnist, of course you can write, you can submit story, but if you say you want to call yourself as a journalist, even if you don't have it, even if even if you don't have a degree in mass communication or journalism, maybe when you want to start the job, get some professional certification, so that you can learn a few things about ethics and other things about safety of journalists and so on. It could be a 6 months or 9 months or 1 year diploma or certificate or something. I don't think that's asking for too much. So you can come in with a medical degree, come in with a law degree or a degree in political science or philosophy or something and say, okay, you are a journalist. Even if you don't come in with that certification, within 2 years of practicing, you are expected to, find something. And this happens whether it's in the nursing profession or different professions around the world. That's how it operates. I think things like this would go a long way in helping provide some stability for journalists and the media industry in general.
Yeah. Yeah. So switching to this thing, so let's wind down. Switching to Nigerian the elections. How do you assess the conduct of the media before and after the elections?
Well, oh, again, I hate to keep repeating myself in terms of that whole thing about the media is a reflection. So you found that the media was as divided as you had political parties and interest group and so on. The man who eventually was declared the winner is a media mogul, has a major interest in the media. It's only natural that his media platform will reflect his views. Other media organizations that were not directly owned by politicians or some of the candidates, they were aligned to maybe friendship through who joined in waste through some other interests they supported. But I think in general, I would say I'm not looking at the biases or the support for one candidate or another. I think I would say the media played an important role, the television station, the newspaper houses, in bringing out the issues, in putting the conversation in in a way that would be of interest to Nigeria. The conversation was quite engaging, whether for or against, whether you liked it or not, whether you supported it or not. I think the coverage was robust. it could be better. You know. But there is also the limit to which media houses or journalists can go. We are not policemen. We can only do so much. So if, for example, you invite a presidential candidate for a debate and they refuse to attend, there's very little you can do about that. Or you invite a politician or a candidate to appear on your TV station or to respond to an issue that you're concerned about and they fail to do that. There's really nothing you can do. It's also you have to defend their right to not want to speak. So to that extent, I think the media played this role for or against, depending on what interest was served. But people, and I think Nigerians can also understand, once we understand the how the media works, whether it's in terms of ownership structure or interest and so on, we'll be able to, weigh everything and then make our own informed decision, not expecting that the media will feed us in a way that whatever the media says or comes up with, we'll take it. This is an era of media and information literacy. There are so many factors that influence every single story that comes out. Talk about ownership, you could talk about interest, you could talk about location, talk about business concerns and all of that. So it's also important that Nigerians have this critical awareness about media and its role and how the media functions to be able to understand how to relate with the media.
Yeah. Um, being appreciate you being very gracious at your time, and we appreciate it. Just the final question, so we don't go ahead and on is if as you survey the media and the political landscape, what would be your best predictions or prognosis for this year?
Well, I still feel that there are a couple of media platforms out there, that whose interests align with the interest of the Nigerian people or the majority of Nigerians. And I don't want to mention names or go into details. Partly because also people are wiser now and people know what they want. So you can only remain relevant when you give people what they want. People are quickly making up their minds about where to go to, which newspaper to read, which television station to watch, which radio station to listen to. So there are alternative, this multiplicity of voices, alternative voices and choices. It's helpful. So it's left to be seen how all of this would come together. But what my greatest joy, it's this opportunity. I mean, this is not 1990 Nigeria where you had only the NTA in terms of Federal Radio Corporation of Nigeria, where if you didn't like it, you would tune off. This is 2024 Nigeria, where there are FM stations all over the place. There are community radio institutions like the army, student union governments have their radios on campus. There are television stations springing up, both terrestrial and otherwise radio, FM stations, newspaper houses, online newspapers, and so on. So that competition in terms of where to go or who to watch or listen to perhaps can help in providing some level of authenticity in terms of the so all the newspaper houses or radio stations or TV can't toe the same line. So you can't buy all of them. You know, there is this expression, media by the people. You could also read it to mean media by citizens, the kind of influence the citizens have on media. But they also read it the opposite sense, that media buying the people, in terms of media shoving down our throats what they want us to read. That still exists, but there are also alternatives. There are choices, there are options, whether new media, whether traditional media. So when you have that robust environment in terms of choices, I think it puts a lot of pressure on the media to do the right thing. Then it creates greater conversation, stronger conversation in terms of what the issues to discuss are. What I mean, so if you read the editorials of some newspapers, except the question will be who is listening, but there are newspapers who have written fantastic editorials about what is happening in the country now, how the current administration, the path they are towing, and so on. So it can only get better. We hope citizens pay more attention to these stories, articles in the newspapers, and join in the conversation, either contributing, either raising further issues, either using it as an opportunity to expand the conversation on some of the issues. So going forward, 2024, it's tough to say how all of this is going to come together. A lot is happening in the country. The whole corruption scandal, which the papers are reporting fairly well, issues of bad governance, whether it's the question of the rule of law or the repression of violence, banditry. So I think the media is trying to do its best within its current limitations. We'll wait and see what happens. And a lot, of course, will depend on not just the direction the government is going, but the concrete reality, practical, physical things happening, how Nigerians are able to survive the economy that is really hurting, how the depreciation of the naira, the real life violence that is going on, kidnapping. So I hope our media is still strong enough and still vibrant and able to sustain the reportage of some of these issues, because they owe it to the citizens and they seem to be the last bastion of these efforts to still keep this country alive and save it, really.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Thank you. I know you're writing a book. I
Yeah.
don't know if you want to share details about the book. It'll be interested to.
Yeah. Well, yeah. So I'm doing a book, and I think my major concern is in terms of state capture in the country. I think so. There are two basic things, really. One is the fundamental existential crisis we face in this country. People can talk about corruption, and I know a bit about corruption. Apart from studying and understanding it, I've also worked for some time at the anti-corruption agency, and I run an organization that has been involved in good governance and accountability issues for many years now. But I think the greatest challenge, and it goes back to the argument I talked about theorizing Nigeria, and I go about within this country. I've traveled deliberately, consciously across the length and breadth of this country as a core member, as a young man. up until when I did my NYSC, I think the old Borno state and Sokoto states were the two states I hadn't visited. So I was praying as a copper to get to serve in either Sokoto or Maiduguri. And I got Maiduguri and I went into a breakdance and my colleagues or classmates were confused. They didn't know why. So they didn't know why I wanted that. And I took with another friend of mine who was posted to Maiduguri. We took a vehicle from Owerri through Aba, then to Yobe, Damatru to Maiduguri. Throughout that 1 year service, I made conscious efforts to travel the length and breadth. So I would travel from Maiduguri through Jigawa, Kano, to Kaduna, to Abuja. I would travel from Maiduguri through Yobe, Bauchi, Jos to Lagos. Then when I finished my NYC, I left, packed my things, traveled from Maiduguri through Jigawa, Kano, Katsina, Zamfara, went to went to Sokoto, then from Sokoto traveled to Kebbi, Niger, Kwara, like just consciously traveling around this country and understanding and seeing the different people in it. Their concern, talking to people, and the biggest challenge we have today is the crisis of nationhood. What is Nigeria? Who is a Nigerian? What does Nigeria mean to us as a people? We live in a country where if you're born in Abuja, you grew up here, or born in Lagos, you grow up in Lagos, pay your taxes in Lagos, you want to run election in Lagos, they will remind you you are from Sokoto State or from Imo State. You have to go back. But there have been Nigerians who go to Canada, they are mayors, go to want to run. If you remove that constitutional requirement in the United States, believe me, every 4 years there have been Nigerian migrants, people who have moved from Nigeria maybe in 10, 15 years to the US who want to run for the president of the United States of America. That's who we are. But back home here, so these are the kind of, part of the
I
issue.
think it's even to add to that, it's even worse that if you like I grew up in Lagos, right? If they sent me if I had to run in Lagos, I'd have that problem. And if I went to any group where my this state is from, I'll still not be I'm really not from Enugu either. So you have a situation where if you look at the guys that run Enugu or Imo or this thing, even though somewhere along the line, maybe they went for youth service or some other place, they're actually from that place, whether it's from Wobodo to Namani
Yeah.
to any of them, current governor. These are people that were born and brought up, went to school there. It's not somebody like me. It's just go come from Lagos to New York.
So
Yeah.
the two aspects of the book around this whole question of nationhood, how do we deal with that? There are still, this is 2024 Nigeria, there are still those who feel Nigeria is the estate of their great grandfathers, and they carry on like that in our daily interactions. What this has led to is a situation, the state capture, whether it's in politics, in the military, in the civil service, in religious affairs, and so on. So we need to interrogate these things. We need to bring back that conversation that, okay, here we are as a people. How do we define our nation? What are, as St. Augustine would say, what's the common object of our love beyond football? What it is that binds what is it that binds us as a people and that we can hold on to. So we can go on and on about this. You look at, when I talk about state capture, Tinubu is president of Nigeria. He still controls who becomes governor, councillor, senator, House of Rep member. Every contract awarded in Lagos Look at the mess happening between the Minister of FCT and you governor for 8 years, and then you want to control what's happening in your state, and you call that democracy, and you say, oh, you are the one. No shame, like no sense of disgrace or shame to say, oh, I bought form. You bought form with your own money or state money for these people. Therefore, you are entitled to a certain percentage of. You can't run a country like that. You look at the whole question of electricity supply. We referenced this in the beginning of the conversation. Why is it that we don't have? I've researched the power sector in Nigeria. Why is it that from power generation to transmission to distribution, companies are owned by retired generals? Those who import what's it called generators, who ensure that these things, companies generate electricity, the gencos, they send to the discos. The discos are supposed to remit money to them. They don't remit the money. They distribute electricity, pocket the money. Then the federal government will come in with billions of dollars in subvention or what is it, bailout. So it's the country has been captured by a rogue elite. And unless we divert, like we take this country away from them, we are just wasting our time. So these are some of the issues I'm hoping I could, tease out in the book I'm working on. Hopefully it should be ready in the next couple of months.
Oh, yeah. Look forward to it. Hopefully we'll be having you back occasionally. So we'll not go on and on. I think it's fresh to always bring you back. Hopefully you make time and come. And we, and have these conversations with us. It's very interesting to take a look at the media landscape in Nigeria, and you are one of the preeminent media professionals operating and actually living in Nigeria. It's interesting. I had that when you were talking about your medical experience. I was in Nigeria for vacation over the summer with our kids. We were all in Nigeria, and our twins had to go to the hospital. I have twin girls that are 2.5 years old. They had to go to the hospital, and it was a flashback to, because my mom worked in the hospital briefly before she went off into her law practice. But it was a flashback as to when my mom was working in hospital. It was just like stuck in time. As a flashback, just going there, they were still giving her the regular, the same thing. I like, it was almost like I never left. Like I was still a 3-year-old child, a 4-year-old child. The same flagyl they wanted to give my twins. the same thing. The same thing of not even caring about the hospital card and hospital records, and it was very interesting. I was just like, wow. In fact, I think we had to use my mother-in-law's family card. They didn't even allow us to register for the card. And they didn't put any records that were there. I was like, what's it? These are 2 years, and they get turned 2 that time. These are 2 years, and my wife was pregnant at that time too. I'm like, what if we needed a reference for when they go back to America? Like, reference to your treatment.
It's a broken system. We need to do more than the usual to fix it. It's a broken system. Anyway.
Yeah, I agree. We'll keep having the conversation. We appreciate I appreciate everything. I look forward to your book. I know you haven't read that. We are Nigerians. Pardon me. Graduate studies, it is. So,
Okay was saying something about you coming around. So if you come around, we can arrange to get you a copy. If you
please, definitely. Maybe I'll be there next week. Let's see how it works out. I'm just waiting for an appointment for my mom at distance. So if I'm there next week, then for sure. But we do appreciate. We thank you for coming on. You've been a delightful guest. Everything. Enjoyed those stories. So thank you very much.
Thank you. keep up the great work. I enjoy listening to the. I have stored a few Ayobe. I think that of Bakoba. I just because I'm extremely busy. When I get the link, I just keep them. I'll go back to them when I thoroughly enjoyed your conversation with Richard, my good friend Richard Akinola. To catch up on the ones I haven't listened to.
Yeah, it's fun having them. It's real fun. We appreciate it. It's fun. What we have to do is keep bringing them back. So reevaluate the current state of things. A lot of them should be. A lot of you guys, we need to bring it back to reevaluate, and so we can make it even shorter and then multiple times. I think it's a lot easier that way. We appreciate.
All right.
Uh,
Thank you very much.